Hi, it's Neil, the Vinyl Whisperer. Recording contracts have always been a tricky part of the music business. Sometimes contracts end with a bang, or maybe even a masterpiece, but sometimes contracts end with a bomb, as we will be talking about. If you're a casual fan of Bob Dylan, or even a serious Bob Dylan fan, you probably already know that Self-Portrait, an album that came out early in Bob's career, is widely considered to be his worst album. And here's the part of the story you might not know. They made another album out of the leftovers from that album. That's right, in 1973, Columbia put out an album called Dylan, which consisted of outtakes from not only Self-Portrait, but also another album called New Morning by Bob Dylan. Here's the funny thing about it. Someone inside of Columbia Records actually said to themselves, hey, we could probably put out an album using songs that weren't good enough to go on Bob's worst album. All of this was the musical equivalent of trying to make a soup out of yesterday's burned casserole. Go figure the logic on this one. We have to talk about it. This is kind of like an example of hell hath no fury like a record label scorned, because all of this stuff came out in 1973 due to the fact that Bob left Columbia Records to sign a deal with Asylum Records, and Columbia was really upset about the whole thing. Here's the mystery that still swirls around that 1973 album we're talking about called Dylan. And that is, was this just simply a cash grab by the record label, which had just lost its biggest moneymaker to a rival record company, Geffen? Or was this just a pure revenge play where they wanted to get back at Dylan for doing that? The answers aren't clear. If it was a revenge plot, it was set up on two different levels. The first level being the fact that the album was stacked with no new Bob Dylan songs, all cover songs of old traditional tunes, as well as a couple covers by Elvis Presley. And on the second level, they came up with a hideous album cover, which, they knew that they wouldn't be able to get Bob Dylan to pose for a cover photo, so they put something together that was bizarre, unflattering, and strange. Well, there's a happy ending to the whole messy Bob Dylan saga. The record label he joined, Asylum, run by David Geffen, only released 2 of his albums, and then Bob returned to Columbia Records, where he remains until now. The interesting thing is, though, that 1973 album, comprised of scraps from a big flop, actually bothered him so much that when he returned to Columbia, he did have a stipulation: I would like to control my masters, which they gave to him. So, nice happy ending. If you're a George Harrison fan and you're looking for a copy of his contract-fulfilling album Gone Troppo from 1983, the best place to look would be the $1.99 bin at your local record store, where it's likely been waiting for you since 1983. To say that this was a bomb and an unsuccessful album is an understatement. It was actually a reaction by George to the way he was being treated on Warner Brothers Records. The album prior to that one was called Somewhere in England, and when he submitted it to Warner Brothers in final condition, they rejected it. They said it wasn't commercial enough. They said that they would like to remove 4 of the tracks on it and have George replace them with more commercial appeal songs. George did that, but the whole experience left him so disgruntled about the record industry and about Warner Brothers that his next album, due to the contract, was Gone Troppo. George gave the album to Warner Brothers. walked away, did no promotion, just completely buried the album and never really spoke about it again. Not only did George Harrison have nothing to do with the promotion of that album, Gone Troppo, he also went so far as to say that he wasn't a musician anymore. He was a gardener. Harrison actually took 5 years off from recording, concentrating on movies that he wanted to help produce and some soundtracks that he helped with. But he did go out on a high note. 5 years later, he did go back to Warner Brothers and put out the album Cloud 9, which was a big success for Warner Brothers Records. Any conversation about albums that should not have been made but were forced to be made due to contractual obligation should include a discussion about Love Beach by Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. This was a toxic mix of contractual obligation, bad decisions, and a group that was way beyond caring about themselves. The group was kind of at the end of their line after a nice long run on Atlantic Records, but the head of the label insisted that they owed one more album. They went to the Bahamas to record a final album. Now, if you take a good look at the cover of this album, it screams, "Do not buy this album." It's a pretty terrible cover, and it's a pretty reflective cover of the quality within that album. It's often said that it's kind of an attempt by the group to try and look like either the Bee Gees or a disco group with some forward-thinking ideas. Nonetheless, it was a bomb, and it was certainly the lowest charting album of their lengthy career, and also led to a 14-year hiatus in the band ever recording together again. Long considered one of the darlings of prog music, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer had a very successful and long recording career with Atlantic Records, but that abruptly came to an end with this album. The first side had some attempts at pop music that could be considered a little bit appealing in a commercial way, and the second side had the obligatory 20-minute cut with 4 parts featuring Emerson on keyboards and tackling the somewhat out-of-date theme of a love affair between a soldier and a fiancée during World War II. I don't think I need to get into too many more details. You get the picture on this album, and even the group denounced it after it was recorded. Carl Palmer, the drummer, a few years later said, "Well, we were at a tough point because, number one, punk was making a lot of waves on the radio and we weren't getting played anymore. So it kind of brought us to a point where we had to either decide we're going to power through as we are or we're going to buckle." Well, he said, we buckled. Not only were the group members not getting along, the album was very divisive to the group's dedicated fans who were puzzled, angry, and trying to make sense of what direction the group intended to go given the album. The funny thing is, Keith Emerson years later said, "You know, the album itself really wasn't that bad, but the cover ruined it. That's what ruined this album, the cover." Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting our channel. And remember, every record has a story, and we plan to bring you more of them. Please support us by subscribing, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.